Judges 6, verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under a terebinth tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon, circle Gideon, was beating out wheat, underline this phrase, in the winepress to hide it, circle hide, to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, underline this sentence, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor," circle valor. And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why," circle why has all of this happened to us? And where are all the wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, "Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?" But now the Lord has forsaken us, circle forsaken, and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned to him, circle Lord again, and said, "Go," circle go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you? And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least," circle least, "I'm the least in my own father's house." And the Lord said to him, but I," circle "but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." And he said to him, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And then he said, "I will stay until you return." So Gideon went into his house and prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot, and brought them to him under the terebinth and presented them. And the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and unleavened cakes and put them on this rock and pour broth over them." And he did so. And the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from under the rock and consumed the meat and unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face," circle face to face. But the Lord said to him, underline the sentence, "Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, underline the sentence, "The Lord is peace." To this day it still stands in Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. That night the Lord said to him, "Take your father's bull and the second bull 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal," circle Baal, "that your father has," circle father, "and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of the stronghold there with the stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down." So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was too afraid, circle too afraid, of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. Then the men of the town rose early in the morning. Behold, the altar of Baal was broken down, and the Asherah was beside it. It was cut down, and the second bull had been offered on the altar that had been built. And they said to one another, "Who has done this thing?" And after they searched and inquired, they said, "Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing." Then the men of the town said to Joash, underline the sentence, "Bring out your son that he may die, for he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Will you contend for Baal? Or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down." Therefore on that day Gideon was called Jerubbaal, that is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he broke down Baal's altar. Have you ever felt like things are going wrong in your life? You ever felt like things that you wanted to come true haven't come true? You ever felt like people you voted for didn't get in? You ever feel like a country that you thought was going a certain way is going a different way? You ever felt like your family that you thought was going to be going one way is now going a different way? You ever felt like your job was like, wow, this is exactly the way I wanted it. All of a sudden your job takes a hard right and it goes into a land of confusion, chaos, total disruption of your life. We are living, because we're alive, lives of disruption. And oftentimes, many times, we feel like we're in one disruption. We feel like, oh, if I can just get out of this disruption, it'll be great. And we go from one fire into the next fire. And then we go from that fire into the next fire. And it gets hotter and hotter and bigger. And we feel like, when is the fire going to stop? We go from one thing to the next. It could be a health thing, could be a financial thing, could be a relational thing, could be a national political thing. We go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. We go, when is there going to be a break? Because I feel like I'm breaking. We're going to take a look today at a man named Gideon. I'm going to look at him actually for the next 3 weeks because his story is so amazing. And we're going to lay a foundation for this man called Gideon today, and it might just change the way you think about how you look at our lives. If you got your notes, pull them out. There should be in your bulletin. If you don't, you can run to the back and grab them. If you're online with me right now, at the top of the comment section on Facebook, there's a link, and you can click on that link and my notes will pop up. Number 1 is this. Ready? Here we go. God appears during Gideon's disruption. God appears during Gideon's disruption. If you've ever felt like your life is disrupted, one of the main reasons we get depressed and we tend towards despair in our disruption is this reason. We don't think God is in control. You want to know why you feel bad sometimes? You want to know why you feel like life's chaos and you go, man, I feel bad about my own life or the country or whatever it is? The reason we feel like that is because we feel like the thing that I wanted to get done isn't getting done. And it's like, God, if you were real, you would have got that done. So because my will didn't get done, God didn't do what I wanted, he must not be in control. Because if God would have taken my advice, things would be right. If God would have taken my counsel, we would have fixed all this mess. But for some reason, now we have things that are disrupting in our lives. And we wonder, how are we going to get through? God has an answer, and it's, interestingly, in a story almost 3,000 years old. Number 1, God appears during Gideon's disruption. God appears during one of the worst times in Gideon's life. Because of disobedience, the Israelites, the nation of Israel, became ruled by their enemies. So this story takes place about 1150 BC. So we are 2000 AD. So rewind the clock 2,000 years, you meet Jesus. Rewind the clock 1,150 years more, you hit Gideon. So Gideon is 1,100 years pre-Jesus in the nation of Israel. Ready, watch. It's so far back in ancient history, Gideon is only about a couple 200 to 300 years removed from the exodus of the miracles of Egypt, where God, through Moses, took the people of Israel out of Egypt and brought them to the promised land. They've been sitting in the good promised land for a couple hundred years, but guess what? They've drifted from God. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you had passion for the things of God? When was the last time your heart was filled with passion for the things of God? Rather than the things of Instagram or the things of Snap to Chat to TikTok. When is the last time your heart was filled with passion for the things of God and not just for the things of our culture or being more popular, or being more beautiful, or wishing you had more followers or whatever? When's the last time that you were like, I don't even care about any of those things as long as I can do the will of God? Because you know what? Here's what happens. Many times, if you were to look back in your history, God's shown up. God gave you that job you didn't think you were going to get. God gave you that contract you didn't think you were going to land. God got you into that school you didn't think you were going to get into. God helped you pass that class you thought you were totally like going to be a loser in. There are things in your life, if you were to look back, you go, man, God met me there. God inserted himself into my life and met me there. If you're honest with yourself, you can look back in your life and go, man, There were times in my life where I was passionate about things of God. I saw God move in my life. God answered prayers in my life. And you know what happens though after a while? When you're not tethered to Scripture, when you're not tethered to God, we all drift. And you know what? Sometimes it's so imperceptible, you don't realize you're far from God until you turn around and go, where's Jesus? It's not that Jesus went anywhere, it's just that we drifted away from the things that we knew when we were younger. There were times where we look back and we go, man, I was really on fire for God in middle school or high school or college. Right when I got out of college, man, God was doing great things in my life. Or maybe even last year before all COVID and all this mishmash hit, and you're like, man, I was really living for God, but all of a sudden COVID hit, and now it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to come to church anymore. I don't know. All this stuff is like whatever. And that's what happened to the nation of Israel. They saw the miracles of God. Some of the greatest miracles in the history of the world. God opens the Red Sea. God delivers them from the strongest nation in the world at that time. God pulls his own people out and puts them in the promised land. And guess what? Over time, over a couple hundred years, generations go by, and they just drifted from God. Which is natural when you don't put your energy towards staying with Jesus. When you don't tether yourself to the things of God, you will drift. And years later, you'll look back and go, where's God? I don't sense God. I don't pray to God anymore. I don't read God's word. I don't go to church. I don't do anything. The passions of my youth are gone. And now I feel lost. That's exactly what's happening in the life of Israel. And Gideon's right in the middle of it. The angel or messenger of the Lord, who was possibly a pre-incarnate Jesus in this story in Judges 6, sits down under a tree owned by Gideon's father and finds Gideon threshing wheat in a wine press as Gideon feared the Midianites would steal his crops. Watch this. So look, Judges 6:11, it says the very first verse. It says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under a terebinth tree. So watch this. The angel of the Lord, in Hebrew, angel means messenger. So it doesn't mean this guy that sat down to talk to Gideon has like wings. We have a stereotype of angel with like these huge wings and wearing like a white robe or whatever and like glowing or whatever the stereotype of angel is. That isn't this. This is a messenger of the Lord. It doesn't say he's an angel in the way that we think of angel. He looked like a regular man. Gideon didn't even recognize that he wasn't a regular guy. So in your mind, think of a regular Middle Eastern looking guy sitting under a tree out of the heat of the day. So Gideon beating out the wheat. A guy walks up, sits under a tree. He's beating the wheat right over there. What's going on? Gideon looks at him and goes, I'm working. What are you doing? Sitting under a tree? So he doesn't even recognize that he's an angel. He looks like a regular Middle Eastern guy. Looks like a regular man. But you know what's interesting? Every time the phrase angel of the Lord shows up in the Old Testament, people eventually recognize they're talking to God. So there are many angels that show up around the Old Testament. They do different stuff that God asked them to do. But when the angel of the Lord comes, people recognize, I just got done talking to God, which is why Gideon's scared he's going to die. Because he recognizes after this episode, I just talked to God face to face, and God's going to put me to death. Because nobody talks to God face to face and survives. So watch this. This might be an indication that the angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate Jesus. Because nobody talks to God the Father directly, ever. But yet people in the Old Testament say they talk to God, and they're scared they're going to die. So it's very possible that God the Son came and was the connector between humanity and God before Jesus became a real human through Mary, which we celebrate at Christmas. So it's very possible the angel of the Lord is a pre-incarnate Jesus before 1,100 years later, he came into the world through Christ. Everybody with me? It's 9:20, I don't know. Listen, ready? We got deeper water to go to. I want you to set the stage. Because Gideon right here is talking to a guy, and the guy goes, hey, mighty man of valor. And Gideon's like, what are you talking about? I've never even been to battle. And let me show you where this took place. This is a Google map of Israel, and this is northern Israel. There's the Jordan River in that little valley right there. The Sea of Galilee is at the top. That's where Jesus will walk on water. during his ministry, 1,100 years after Gideon. Gideon, however, grows up in the Jezreel Valley. It's a low, luscious area of northern Israel, and it was well-watered for a plain that grew a lot of crops. Gideon comes from a somewhat wealthy family, and he grows up in a place called Ophrah. And so at that time, God had allowed, because of Israel's disobedience, the Midianites, who were from the south, that's where you see this arrow coming up from the south, and they crossed the Jordan River, and they invaded Israel every year and came in and took all their food. So the Israelites were starving, not because they didn't have food, but because somebody came in and always stole it. It's like in our country, when we're growing food, the Canadians coming down and riding their horses, the Mounties, and coming and collecting all of our corn and our potatoes from Idaho, and basically hauling all of America's food back up into Canada. And we as Americans go, dude, who's going to stop the Mounties from taking all of our food? Do Mounties even have guns? Whatever. So anyway, the Mounties come down from Canada, and they take all of America's food, and we're starving. But it's not because we can't produce food. We can produce food. We just keep getting it stolen from our northern neighbors. And that's what's happening here, is neighbors, warring factions are coming into Israel, stealing all their food and leaving. So Gideon is beating out wheat in a wine press. And we miss this picture in modern days, because in ancient days, you would never beat out any kind of grain in a wine press, because it pollutes the wine press and clogs up everything that is valuable about squashing grapes. So here is an ancient wine press from northern Israel. It's basically a hollowed out piece of rock, and it's usually the lowest place in a vineyard. So you can see the steps going up to the right there. Think about out on Rancho California, where all of our vineyards are. Many of them are up on hills. The grapes grow up around hills. And so the vine dressers, even in our valley, will at some point clip all the grapes, and they'll haul them down the hill to where they process the wine. Same thing in ancient Israel. They're going to clip all the wine grapes. They're going to haul them down to this pit, and it's the old way of stomping out the grapes. You stomp out the grapes, and you make it into grape juice, and it'll flow out of here into jars. They have little holes that'll flow into jars. So Gideon is beating out grain. So grain, the valuable part of the grain is the seed inside the husk. And you got to beat the grain so that the seed comes out, and then you gather up all the husks and throw them away, and now you have food. Well, Gideon's so scared of the Midianites coming and stealing his food, he's beating it out in a wine press, which is crazy because you would never do that unless you were desperate and scared. So Gideon's a weenie, is what I'm saying in this story. If you get anything out of this story, remember this: Gideon is a mighty man of weeniness. Here's Gideon beating out the grain because he's scared in a wine press, which you would never do, ever, unless that was your most desperate way of feeding your family. So now the angel of the Lord comes and sits under a tree, like a terebinth tree, which is basically like a big shrub. He sits under a terebinth tree, and he's watching Gideon beating out the wheat in this wine press. He's going, "Hey, mighty man of valor, what you doing, Mr. Weenie?" Ready? Look here. The angel calls Gideon a mighty man of valor, though he's never even been to battle. And here's our principle: God often sees more in us than we see in ourselves. I want to encourage you with something this morning. Ready? God often sees more in us than we see in ourselves. There are going to be moments in our lives where we're going to feel like, I'm not good looking, I'm not an athlete, I'm not very smart, I don't have many friends. I just kind of feel like I'm not really valuable, honestly. I don't feel valuable to myself. I don't think other people value me. I don't think really even God values me. Like, honestly, what value do I really have? And so you've got Gideon beating out the grain in a wine press, And I love this. The Lord shows up and speaks to him, and he speaks truth and a future into his life. He calls him a mighty man of valor, and Gideon hasn't ever even been in battle. And he's doing the most weenie-ish thing you could ever do, which is try to hide your food in a wine press. And I want us to understand something. It is oftentimes in our most depressed, darkest, most deserted feeling moments, most disrupted moments of our lives that God inserts himself into our life to let us know we're not forgotten, we are not cast aside, we have a hope and a future and a vision if we follow God. Oftentimes we find ourselves lost because we left God. So it isn't that God doesn't want to bless us, it isn't that God doesn't want to lead us, it's that we haven't wanted to be led by God. And when we find ourselves broken and lost and desperate and disrupted, those oftentimes the mercy of God is flooding into our lives going, hey, I got a great future for you. I got a great future for you. But you know where the future is for you? It's if you follow me. The future isn't for you if you're going to stay in this wine press. You want to stay in the wine press and be depressed? Okay. But you know where the future is? With me. So mighty man of valor, are you ready? God often sees more in us than we even see in ourselves. God sees a future, a glorious future he wants to bless. But many times we got to leave the wine press. We got to leave the way we ended up there and start walking a new way with God. Gideon recalls to the angel his knowledge of God's promise and his heart's desire for a change in his own country of Israel. The angel affirms his desire to serve the true God and assures him that he will be with him. Ready? Here's our principle. God often raises up those who know God's word and refuse to live in syncretism. You're like, it's 9:20 in the morning. What the heck is syncretism? What? Look at it. You know what syncretism is? It's allowing a bunch of things to be worshiped as equal. So there's a god called Baal in this story, and there's a goddess called Asherah. They're both fertility gods. And in ancient Israel, you know why you worship a fertility god? Is because the way you got wealthy was if you had a bunch of children, so you needed to produce kids, and if your animals produced a bunch of other animals. So your animals were like our stock market. If your animals kept cranking out, this is cranking out, I guess, more calves, your cows came up with more calves, and your camels camelized, and everybody kept producing. Guess what? The more animals you crank out, the wealthier you become. So it's like the stock market. You could double, triple, quadruple your money if your animals can keep on producing. So what's your highest value to become wealthy and to be secure is have a lot of kids, especially sons, to protect your stuff, and to have a lot of animals that keep reproducing. So you know what they did? They worshipped fertility gods and goddesses, which is why in the Old Testament, they continually keep worshiping Baal, which is a made-up god of fertility, and they keep on worshiping a goddess called the Mother of Heaven, called Asherah, who's a fertility goddess. And many times they were together, altar of Baal and the pole of Asherah. And they would go out and they would worship these cultic fertility gods going, please give me more sons, please give me more daughters, please let my animals become more. Because that's where their wealth was. You want to multiply your wealth? Then you worship Baal and Asherah. That's called syncretism. What it means is this: Baal and Asherah and the God of the Bible are all the same. They're equal. I worship them all. Syncretism means you just put them all together and go. It's like a buffet of gods. Anybody ever been to a buffet? Went on down to Sizzler or Denny's or whatever? Is Denny's a buffet? Maybe they're not a buffet. Okay, it's been a minute since I've been to Denny's, like my college years, so I didn't know. But you go to a buffet and you can choose whatever you want. You choose whatever you want, and it's all equal. The green Jell-O is the same as the hash browns and whatever else. It's like, it's all good. But with God, there's no buffet of God. Everybody understand what I'm saying? Syncretism says everything's the same, just choose something, you pull it on a plate and it's all good. No. When you follow God, God will change your life. When you follow other things, they will lead you away from God. And you and I have to come to the place where we go, there are things in my life I know that don't honor God. And there are things in my life I have to leave. There are ways I know, there are trails I'm passing down that I think is the same as following God, but it's not. And I know it's not. And I need to let go of some of those things that I've been holding on to and follow Jesus. And that's what's happening in this moment with Gideon. Number one, God appears during Gideon's disruption. God appears during Gideon's disruption. And I want you to understand something. We are in a disrupted moment in our culture, in all of our lives. And God is showing up literally in this moment. In the darkest moments, the light shines. So in this moment, don't have despair, have hope. Because in these moments, God shows up. Which leads us to number two. Gideon learns to have peace in disruption. What? How many of you guys are at peace right now? We got a new president. We got a new vice president. We're heading towards another 4 years of whatever this presidency is going to bring us. We got health issues going on with COVID still. We got financial things. Some of us don't have jobs. We're still in this building. How many of you guys are at peace? Who's living in perfect peace right now? I am. You want to know why? How can Gideon be in perfect peace beating out grain in a wine press? Being a class A weenie. A loser. Scared loser. Guess what's going to happen here? God's going to bring him peace in the middle of disruption. And it's a lesson for all of us. And here's my point. Ready? If you don't have peace today because of our presidential election, you trusted in the wrong thing, son. Because even if the other guy would have become our president, that life isn't any better. You're still trusting in the wrong guy. Because politics should never bring you peace. Money should never bring you peace. Stuff or popularity should never bring you peace. Because all that stuff can be taken away in a moment. And guess what? You know where you find peace? And the only place you find peace is God. We trust Jesus and no one else. So when things don't go our way, we can still live in peace. When people don't end up in places we hope they would, we can still live in peace. When you don't get the job you thought you were going to get, you can still live in peace. When you lose the job you thought you were going to retire in, you can still live in peace. You can still live in peace all the time. Why? Because God is in control. Not me, not you, not a president, not our jobs. Who's in control? God's in control. And guess what? Ready? Here, let me bend your mind. God's going to do things you don't approve of. What? Yep. There are going to be times God goes, I am going to do something that you don't like. And you're going to go, that's not fair. You're going to stomp your foot like a 13-year-old girl. And you're a grown-up man stomping your foot about elections and jobs and health and whatever. And you're going to go, God, this isn't right. This isn't fair. Guess what? God does things that are hidden from us. You know what our job is to do? Not to question God, to do everything we can. But when God does something different outside of what we've been able to do, we live in peace. Because peace comes from within, not without. Peace comes from your heart. It doesn't come from politics. It doesn't come from money. Peace doesn't come from me, from the outside of you. It comes from the inside, from God. Gideon leaves to prepare a meal to honor the angel. And when he returns, the angel consumes it with fire. And after the angel disappears, Gideon realizes that he has seen God. In recognition of that event, Gideon builds an altar to the Lord. And here's a principle, ready? Our actions prove what we honor. Woo! Our actions prove out what we honor. Here's what I mean by that. How you act is proof of who you serve. You want to talk about syncretism? I'll talk to you about syncretism. You know how it happens in our culture? We don't worship and bow down to Baal. Actually, put up a picture of Baal. they found this, an old Canaanite Baal. And in the ruins, this is actually from pretty close to Gideon's time. So here's a picture of Baal. And Baal means father of heaven. So there was a goddess of heaven and a father of heaven. And Baal was the fertility god and the god of water. And so water would bring crops, and fertility, sexual intercourse between either humans and animals together would produce children and or other animals. So this was the god you went to and said, Baal, please bless our fertility. Please give us rain. And Asherah was the same thing on the female side. So understand that we don't do this anymore, but you know what we do in our culture? We expect politics to bring us peace. We expect the person that we voted for to fix our lives. We expect our jobs to make our lives work. We make other things God. And you know how you make other things God is when you're trusting in other things rather than the true God for what's true. If you have any less peace today than you did 2 days ago, you're trusting in the wrong thing. That's syncretism. What it means is I trust other things at the same level as God. And when these things don't perform because they're not God, now I get depressed and I'm in despair and now I don't want to live another day. Why? Because you're not trusting in the true God that exists. So we don't bow down to Baal, but we bow down to a lot of things in our culture that we equate with God. The things you honor are the things that you serve. Could be popularity, could be money, could be whatever. We do the same things as ancient Israel, just in a different form. Realizing that this contact with God should cost him his life, God reassures him he won't be put to death. Seeing that he has had the mercy of God on him, Gideon calls God Jehovah Shalom. That's a great tattoo. Put that right on your face. You know what Jehovah Shalom means? Jehovah is the Hebrew word for God, Jehovah. And shalom is, when we go to Israel, you'll hear that word a lot. They still use it to this day. If you're Jewish, Jews use the word shalom, which means a blessing or peace be upon you. You'll hear that when you go get a falafel somewhere. And they say, hey, shalom, peace be upon you. It's a greeting. It's the way we say in America, hey, good to see you, or, hope you have a great day. So Gideon here calls God Jehovah Shalom, which means I should have died from contacting God. And even while I'm beating out wheat in a wine press at the lowest point of my life, guess what? I can have peace. Why can I have peace? Because God met me. And you know what's crazy here? He has peace and his circumstances haven't even changed. He's still beating out wheat. How can he have peace and he's still in a pit? You want to know why? Because circumstances don't make or break your peace if you know God. Circumstances are just circumstances, but God is always God. And if your emotions go up and down with your circumstances, that means you're not trusting God. In fear and insecurity, believers can trust God to be their peace. So in the Old Testament, it was Jehovah Shalom. In the New Testament, Jesus, now watch this is kind of crazy. The angel of the Lord may have been a pre-incarnate Jesus chilling under the tree talking to Gideon. Possibly. Now watch, 1,150 years later, Jesus, the true God, steps into history, which we celebrate at Christmas, by becoming a real human through Mary. 30 years later, at the end of his ministry, when he's going to die on the cross, you know what Jesus says? He talks about peace to his disciples. Look at this in John 14:27. Look at this beautiful verse. What do I leave with you? What do I leave with you? Peace I leave with you. What does he leave? My peace I give to you. Not as Twitter gives, not as Instagram gives, not as TikTok gives, not as your job gives. Temporary, just fleeting peace. That's not what I give you. I don't give as the world gives. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be what? Afraid. You want to live life without fear? You want to live life without anxiety? You want to live life without worry all the time? Continually, relentlessly trust God. How do I do that then? I always feel anxiety. I always feel fear. Okay, you can't help how you feel, but you can help how you handle your fear. You can't help how you feel. Your feelings will come over you. But the next step you make into either giving into that fear or going with faith in God, that's the key. I can't help how I feel all the time, but I can always affect how I feel with where I take it. When I'm scared, when I have anxiety, when I feel like things aren't going to work out, I don't just wallow in it and go, oh, there's no hope. I don't go to Justin Bieber to give me hope. I don't let a celebrity go, everything's going to be fine. Dude, you can't even run your own life, son. I don't go to celebrities to tell me how to live my life. I go to God's word. I go to Jesus. And it's amazing. Even in the chaos, God gives me peace. Even when I'm beating out wheat in a wine press and at the lowest point of my life, God gives me peace. And then he speaks truth and life and light into my life so that I have hope for the future. And that's exactly what's happening here in the story. Which leads us to number 3. Number 1, God appears during Gideon's disruption. Number 2, Gideon learns to have peace in disruption. And number 3, Gideon learns to trust God in disruption. I want to hammer this part home. Listen to me. Are you trusting God today? Do you trust God? Things may or may not have gone the way you wanted them to go lately. But that doesn't matter. Do you trust God? Do you trust God or no? You have to answer that in your own self. Trust God with your future. Trust God with your schooling. Trust God with the guy you're going to marry. Trust God with the young lady that you're going to take as a wife. Trust God with the children you're going to have. Trust God with the children you wish you didn't have. Do you trust God? That night, God gives him a test mission to tear down the local cult altars to Baal and the pole of Asherah, which were owned by his own father. Check this out. Ready? Angel of the Lord, possibly pre-incarnate Jesus. Looks like a regular Middle Eastern guy. Gideon doesn't recognize him as God. Doesn't glow, doesn't have wings. He's just chilling under a tree in the hot Middle Eastern sun, in the shade. Gideon beating out wheat in a wine press because he's a weenie. Hey, man of valor, how you doing? What are you talking about? Man of valor, why don't you come help? Beating out this wheat. Guess what he says? Hey, be at peace. And he realizes he can have peace even in this current situation. But you know what happens? Is that God tells him that night, I want you to go tear down your dad's altar. What? Yeah, you know those local cultic altars to Baal and Asherah? They were owned by his dad. Those were Joash's altars. And Joash is an Israelite. He's living in syncretism. And you know what? God comes and tells Gideon, tear down your dad's junk. Tear down all that stuff he built. Rip apart his altar. Chop down the Asherah pole. Chop up the Asherah pole made of wood. And I want you to set a fire on top of that altar. And I want you to burn his own cattle. What? So watch this. God tells him, I'm gonna use you to lead a massive reformation in Israel. But Gideon's like, I don't know if I can do that. Okay, well, let's do a test mission. Instead of me leading you out to Iraq to go fight terrorists over there, we're just going to have you go take over a Dairy Queen first. You're like, I don't know if I can Dairy Queen's great. So instead of doing that, let's just see if you can pull this off. He goes, just tear down your dad's stuff. And you know what it leads to this? In following God, some previous ways of life, including our own family values that we grew up with, become unacceptable. Woo! I wish I had time to run down this road. I can't run down it very far, but I'm going to say this to you. Listen to me. Ready? Many of us grew up in homes where there were some things that were acceptable, ways of speaking, jokes that we told, pornography in our home. That was just normative for some of us who grew up and it was right there. from dad, from mom. Some of us grew up in same-sex homes. It was like we had two moms or two dads or whatever. And it's like, well, it didn't really affect me. I grew up and I loved both my moms or whatever. We grew up in homes that, to us, it was normative. And then all of a sudden, we come to know Jesus. And things that we took as normative now all of a sudden are unacceptable. And we have to take a step away from what we grew up in. Traditions that are unacceptable to God, that are perverse to God. Things that we move away from our own homes. Ways of speaking that we can no longer speak, jokes we can no longer tell, ways of viewing things we can no longer view, ways of acting with our sexuality that we can't act that way anymore. Because God now, we are following him. We don't follow the traditions of our family or generations past that were okay for other people. Once we come to know Jesus, our minds change and our lives change. And right here, Joash, his dad, has been doing ungodly things in Israel, his own dad. And Gideon now is told to go, I want you to go tear down everything dad did. And you know what? Gideon goes, okay, but I'm going to do it at night. He doesn't even do it during the day. He's like, I'm going to wait till the sun goes down, and then I'm going to do it. This is the lowest of the low. I'll do what you're asking me, but it's going to be under the cover of night. And he tears down everything. And guess what? In the morning, the men of the village come out and they're ready to sacrifice to their fertility god, and everything's gone. And they go, who did this? They find out Gideon did it. And you know what they say? Hey, bring your son out. Go to Joash. Why don't you bring your son out because we're going to kill him. As he is scared, he does it at night. And in the morning, the men of the city come out to kill him. Sometimes following God's will involves putting our lives and our livelihood at risk. Woo! Can't run down this too very far either, but I'm going to tell you this. When some of us came to know Jesus, our jobs became unacceptable. There are some of us who are doing, our livelihood is ungodly. And we know it is. It's supporting ungodly lifestyles. Some of us, when we came to Jesus, we knew we had to stop our job. We knew that it was creating wickedness in other people's lives. Before we knew Jesus, everything's fine. Everything looks the same. But once we came to know Christ, we realized, man, my job is making people's lives ungodly. I'm leading people away from God. And I'm making money from it. And right here, Gideon realizes, I'm going to tear down one of the ways people worship their gods, the made-up gods, and they're going to want to kill me, but I have to trust God. The old ways of living can't go anymore. I got to start a new walk with God, even if it goes against everything that I've done before. In defense of his son, Joash challenges Baal, the made-up god, to defend his own honor. So the men call Gideon Jerubbaal, meaning let Baal fight against him. God often uses those who want to serve him but don't know what to offer except being willing to do what God asks. And that's what I'm asking of you today. Listen to me and I'm done. Here's what I'm asking of you today. What I'm asking you is this. From this moment right now, from where you stand right now in your life, the very first step of following God is this, away from syncretism, away from like everything's the same. I worship all things equally. The very first step is this, God, I will do what you ask me to do. The very first step of having a life that honors God, that God blesses, the very first step of that isn't mental assent. You already know what's right. The very first step of following God is I will be obedient. Ready? Whatever this step is, could be a change of a job, could be a change of where you go on the internet, could be a change of who you hang out with, could be a change of how you view life. This first step has to happen in your life for you to be blessed by God, to have a new way of living. Many of us are still beating the weed out in a wine press going, I hate my life, but we don't want to follow God. We don't want to live for God. So you're going to stay in the wine press your whole life, son. There has to be a point where you go, I'm done with this. I'm going to go follow God. No matter what it takes, I will honor God. When I think of my own life, I go, If I'm actually honoring God in my life, I should be a better father this week than I was last week. I should be a better husband this week than I was last week. I'm a loser every day of my life. But this week I should be less of a loser than I was the other loserish weeks before. I should be a better loser today than I was before. Why? Because I want to honor Jesus as a husband. I want to honor Jesus as a father. I want to honor Jesus as a pastor who works hard at a church. I want to honor God with my life. Nobody's perfect, but guess what? You can honor God better today than you did yesterday. God doesn't expect perfection, but he expects that first step of obedience to go, I'll do whatever you ask. I'll tear down these altars in my own life. Because I'm tired of beating this weed out. I'm tired of living like this. I'm ready to follow God. Ready? God can use our small steps of faith during disruption to lead us to do greater things. Isn't that beautiful? God can use our small little steps of faith going, I'm going to follow you today, God, to do great things in the future. And we're going to see that with Gideon. I'm going to preach on him the next 2 weeks. This story was so good, I was going to try to tell this whole story in one sermon, and I'm like, this is too tasty. But I'm going to start with Gideon the weenie today. And you're going to see he's actually going to become a man of valor, and it's going to be really encouraging for all of us. But I wanted to start here. It has to be the first step out of the wine press and going, I'm going to go handle business. Everybody with me? God wants to bless your life, but you got to crawl out of the wine press. You got to say, I'm going to be obedient today. And God will start to bless your life.